Hi, everyone. Welcome to the International Water Resources Association webinar for World Water Day. This year's theme is valuing water. So we have a really great set of panelists here today. We have Francesco Baglio, a professor of hydraulics at Pontino di Molino in Italy. Xingjing Yang, Executive Secretary of the International Association for Coastal Reservoirs Research in Australia. Jennifer Gouliard, water risk expert at the World Bank, Dr. Lily Yu, Deputy Division Chief and Professor Senior Engineer at the General Institute for Hydropower and Water Resource Planning and Design, Ministry of Water Resources in China, and a member of the IWRA China chapter, and David Herbert Coleman, Program Manager, Water Resources at CWE, who is also serving as our moderator here today. We appreciate his help. This is a webinar, as you probably know, hosted by the International Water Resources Association. The IWRA is an international network of researchers and practitioners who work on a multidisciplinary range of water resource issues. We are a nonprofit, non-governmental education organization, and the IWRA provides a global knowledge-based forum for bridging disciplines and geographies by connecting professionals, students, individuals, corporations, institutions, everyone who's concerned with the sustainable use of the world's water resources. So we're really happy to have you here today. Thank you for coming and joining us. I know that a lot of people in the water community are very excited about World Water Day. It's kind of a special celebration for us. So we have a really great panel to put together today. People who are both researchers and practitioners who have been active in the field for quite a long time. So as you know, this World Water Day is celebrated on March 22nd every year. And it's really a way for us to share our research, share our work, share our love for water, but also to bring real attention to the issues of water resources. So as you know, this year's theme for 2021 is valuing water. And I think this is really, for me, a really fascinating and interesting topic this year because, you know, beyond the issues of just pricing and economic, this can include questions about how we look at the environmental value, the social and cultural value all of us are placing, different people are placing on water. So as water becomes under increased stress, the way we understand these different competing values for water and will become really, to me, I think, a key way to help understand and balance these competing demands. So just to kind of briefly explain the format of today's event. So to start, we're going to have each of our panelists give a short presentation, and then we're going to put the questions at the end of the event. So if you have a question, you can go ahead and type it into the Q&A box down at the bottom, and we'll see it, and our great moderator will be able to help get your questions answered. Now, if you have a question, of course, that you'd like to ask just a single panelist or for the group, you can send those in. And, you know, if it's a small question about, you know, something you saw on the third slide or something, feel free to reach out to our panelists. They're all very friendly people. I can vouch for this. And go ahead and you can follow up with them directly, which might be if your question doesn't have time to be answered. So with that in mind, I think it is time for us to turn the floor over to our first speaker, Francesco Baglio. Francesco, the floor is yours. That looks great. Sounds great.
Okay, thanks. So thank you very much for this invitation. Very excited to be the first. And in a conference or in a workshop related to the value of water, I will give a particular view on the value, in that we are talking about somehow a negative value, in that what water can create as damages. Damages are obviously, flood damages are negative values, but they should also be accounted for as a value. The idea is that in Europe we have a law, if you like, which is called the Flood Directive, which give us an idea how to handle this. And of course, the Flood Directive is considering all the components of the problem, from the hydrological to the hydraulic part and to the damage part. And today we are talking about that, which is at the end the value in, of course, good managing a flood means avoiding damages, and this is the value we are talking about. And when we are talking about flood damages, we are also talking about something which has not been so much considered. Typically, we hydraulic engineers consider all the tools to avoid a flood. Flood damages means residual risk. Flood damages means managing what happens when the flood has occurred. However, not considering that possibility, that is managing damages, means also losing some cards, some possibilities for optimization or minimization, if you like, of the consequences of the flood. So in the flood directive, the modeling of damages, the consideration of damages is considered as much as important as the hydrologic and hydraulic parts. There are no standard, I would say there are no standard models for flood damages. So it's something which is applicable, but is also a very much open research field. And according to the flood directive, we have main categories, which will be shown in a short. And we wanted to define procedures to calculate the expected damages after a flood. And the important thing was everything must be applicable. It's not research. This is application. All people who are in the field knows that unfortunately these models are not so universal. They must be tailored to the local context. So there are some features which are general, but some features must be identified within your own countries, as I will tell you. And so we established what we call the Movida project. Movida means in Italian something like integrated model for flood damage validation. And this was sponsored by the River Po Basin Authority. The Po River is the largest river in Italy. It covers, basically the basin is all the northern part of the country. The three pillars over which we structured this procedure was we want to use only national data, means data which are available for the whole Italian territory, possibly official data, and if not official, very well spread and very robust data, like Google Maps or things like that. Standardize the calculation, of course, and to provide an information system, a GIS information system to handle all the problems so that things are really usable. I am acknowledging the work of a very large group of research centers all in Italy. As I told you, it's important to tailor the procedure for your own country, but the conceptual part of the work was done together with many people. And this is the core of the procedure. We have exposed element, or what we call sectors: people, strategic infrastructures, economic activities, cultural and environmental heritage. You can't read it very well, but there are some chemical plants or NATEC problems in the last line. And each of these sectors, which are dictated by the flood directive, are subdivided into subsectors which require individual models for evaluating damages, because of course context or structure of a residential building are different items, and a residential building is not exactly the same as an industrial one. Agriculture, damage to agriculture are completely different than damage to commerce. So you need a specific model. So it's not one model, it's many models. And for many of these subsectors or sectors, we could derive a quantitative evaluation of the damages, either in economic or in physical terms. But for some of them, we were not able to define models in that sense. And so we only can give qualitative description of what can happen. And for a few of them, just descriptive, not even, is like more a general kind of history, what can happen in a certain case without giving specific information. But for most of these sectors, we are able to provide quantitative indicators saying what you should expect to happen if a certain flood scenario is happening. And all this was applied first to 6 areas, which are painted here in the north of Italy, and then we're applying them to further 15 more, so to cover most of the most important flooded area or potentially flooded area in north of Italy. As I told you, all the sectors require specific models, and each model looks like this. This is just a very a schematic of the model, but what we need basically is the modeling approach. Which model are we using? The scale of analysis. We typically work at the mesoscale, so a sort of distributed scale, not individual objects, but for example, for residential buildings, we work at the object scale because it's more convenient. The most important thing probably is the source of the data, or the input data, because this is the key problem for all these kind of evaluation, having good data as an input. So you have to clarify where you are taking the information from, and then finally the output that you are providing. That means economic losses rather than physical losses. Economic means euros in our case. Physical losses may mean how many doors or which is the fraction of the object which has been destroyed, say, not for buildings in our case. And the final output would be a map with the mesoscale. So you don't see here the individual buildings in this case, but areas which are colored according to the intensity of the damage, or whatever color you choose. In this case, the intensity of the damage for that area, and then of course summing up for the whole area. This is the town of Torino in the north of Italy. So for each sector we have something like that, and then what you also need is a summing up somehow, because we have, at the end of the story, we have 9 categories or sectors, and some of them are depicted with more than one output indicator. So at the end, we have 21 indicators, which must be combined into one single indicator for plotting the territorial risk. And so we are now working, this is the last step of our work, on a multi-criteria rating model, which must be negotiated with the local stakeholder, of course, in order to color the map with one single indicator, giving to the user the perception of what is more at risk, or more, if you like, more at damage prone, and what is less. Mixing up all those categories, which I remind you mix up people with churches, with the buildings, with economic activities. So this is a very critical point which must be negotiated with local stakeholders. The methodology itself is a standard multi-criteria analysis. As I told you, very important to have an information system handling all this, because you're handling a lot of data. It's not so much the calculations you have to do, while very much is the preparation and the handling of the data layers, because you have a lot of inputs. And this must be done through a dedicated system. This will be an open GIS in order to be easily used by anybody without any licensing. Final step, which is next step, is technological transfer to the local authorities and to professionals, because this has been developed in research centers, but must be used by the authorities and by professionals through, of course, the information system, which is a key component of the problem. And the Movida method should become a standard for the evaluation of damage, and therefore to one of the components of flood risk in our territory. I think this is the end of my talk. I just wanted to show this application. As my colleagues know here for the presentation, I will not be able to join the workshop to the end because I will be vaccinated today. So at 9:30, I must leave this room. If there are some discussion in the chat, I can answer immediately. Otherwise, I ask you to write me an email so that I can give you further information. That's all.
Right. Thank you, Francisco. Are you going to do the introductions, Scott, for each of the speakers?
Well, I think we'd be
and
easy.
Then I just moderate at the end.
The speaker to can introduce themselves. They know themselves pretty well.
So I guess we would like to invite Dr. Yang to introduce himself. Dr. Yang will be talking about valuing water in history from old wells, from modern dams to future coastal reservoirs. So take it away.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all these friends across the world. I'm Shuqing Yang, and from IWRA, the Association for Coastal Reservoir. Probably this is new for you to hear this terminology. And I have a son. He always asks me, Daddy, where do you come from? Where do you want to go? Because I'm Chinese, I'm living in Australia. I told my son, I originally come from ocean. This is me, this is me, this is me, and then now come to the coast area. Look at me, I always, for my whole lifetime, I'm looking for one thing, that is water. Now, everybody now living in the coast area, and then where the water comes from, very, very clean water comes from. I tell my son, this is the future your drinking water comes from. He said, Daddy, I can't drink that, that's too salty, that is seawater. I said, no, you have to change your mind, coast reservoir. And very recently, we have this satellites landed on Mars, and my son asked me another question. Daddy, look at the sky, which star has the knife? I told him, only water engineer can answer this question because everybody looking for water. Why? I told my son, because you're nodding. In your body, 70% of your body is water. Water shape yourself. Without water, forget the knife, forget everything. This is why I told my son, I bring my son to the church, to other places, and I show him everyone on every creature, every life on this planet, highly respect our water. From a very old time to current time, from India, from everywhere. I told we have different religion, but one thing is common. Every religion has the same assumption. Water can purify everything, including your soul, nothing else. Now I say, everybody now almost live in the coast area or very close to coast area. I told my son, look, these people, the red dots are people now living. Look at the Indian, they're almost uniformly distributed in this Indian land. But I tell my son, look, another 20 years later, all the Indian people were similar to Australia. Now Australia, 90% of people live in the coast area. I tell this is the trends. But look at the dance distribution, uniformly distributed over our land. This is why we have big problems. We don't, so many people need water. We need to have more dams here, but we don't have. So how to solve the problem? And then now our problem is so much everywhere, red color, we don't have water. So look at currently, I tell my son, water resource engineering should be your future. You should work on this area and then look at how people now manage this water. I agree with Professor Nadia. He said that flood water's value should not be underestimated. But currently, everybody underestimated flood water. Look at people, flood time, just dump the flood water to the sea. How about it is value? it is very equal to 0. That is wrong. Without develop this water, nobody have the future. Look at the dam. Dam can be developed only in the upstream, the mountain area, but not in the downstream area. And the dam can only store the water in the dry period, not in flood period. So what kind of consequence we have? Flood time, we discharge flood water to the sea, ocean. And then in the dry time, upstream dams stop the water, and then in the river, no water, we have disasters. Now, our water resource engineers should stand up to change it. And other group people try to say, this is my job. They are desalination people. What that philosopher they have, they need your flood water mix with the fresh water first, and then after 6 months, 2 of them fully mixed, and then say, I have good technology, I can separate 2 of them, just waste the energy, just waste the money. That is not good way, not a sustainable way. So the good way is use coarse reservoir to reserve flood water in flood season, for dry season to use. This is one stone to kill 2 birds. One is water resource development, another one is the flood disaster mitigation. Look at this one. This is the how much water we have from the waters, rivers, so much water. The unit is here, how much water people use. Now everybody says we don't have water. This is why we need to have the World Water Day. Sorry, I have to tell you, today you only use 0.38 so much water compared to 0.8% only. For this couple, you only use 1 drop of the water. We have enough water. So currently we have the dam, we have the coast reservoir in Australia and Netherlands in this year, and we have the inland reservoirs and dams, we have coast reservoirs. We have the different associations. In future, Water Resource Association and also Coast Reservoir Association should work together going this way to provide sufficient water for our people in the coast area. And this is an example of coast reservoir in Singapore. And then before that, this is downtown area. Before they build the dam, here fresh water, here outside is the seawater. Before they finish this one, every year they had flood disasters. After this one, before the peak time, they make the water to the ocean by pumping or by other things. And then during the peak discharge time, and then this one is a giant flood detention pond. So after this one finish, we convert flood water to water resources and 0 flood disaster for our people. And the UN last year, World Water Day recommended a coast reservoir for every country. This is the Shanghai's coast reservoir. Now everyone in Shanghai drink the sweet water from the coast reservoirs without the desalination, without waste our energy. Now this year, sorry, last year, Indonesia minister announced the coast reservoir will be used in my country. We say ISCR's job and IWRA's job will be the same. 2 of us overlapping together. We will provide sufficient high quality and affordable water to the world, because 80% people will move and live in the coast area with our promise, minimum environmental and social impact. We promise. Look at the difference, past and future water management. Past one, people says no enough water. Future, we say we have enough water. Past one, people says flood water can be developed. We say flood water is also valuable resources, can be developed. And water storage can be only constructed in mountain area. We say also can be constructed in the sea. High environmental impact, we say minimum environmental impact. And other people purposely just dumping the rainwater to the sea. Now we conserve the rainwater in the sea. So my conclusion is simple. The water is not running out of water. Water is running out of water. It's a river mouth. Our water crisis is not caused by water shortage. We don't have water shortage. We have storage shortage. Two of them are totally different. We can't mix them. And the freshwater storage in the seawater environment is feasible. ISCR and IWRA should work together to help people drink the natural water, not the artificial water from your toilet. Water value becomes higher if water sources is close to the users with less impurities. Work together, we can achieve SDG 6. We say without sustainable water supply, without IWRA's work, no one can achieve other SDGs. Forget it, energy or other things. Without a cost reservoir, I also say, if you don't pay attention to the value of the flood water, it is impossible to achieve SDG 6 in UN 2030 agenda. It is time for us to work. Thank you very much, everybody. Yeah.
So thank you, Dr. Yang. Just a reminder to people who are there, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A as mentioned by Scott at the beginning of this, and then we can pass it through and look at those questions to the different panelists at the end. So the next speaker will be Jennifer Muller-Gallant, who's a water risk expert from the World Bank Group, and she'll be speaking about experiences in valuing water in Bangladesh, lessons learned and future applications. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much, David. And let me see if I can share my screen. Okay. Can you hear me and can you see the screen?
Everything was good.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for inviting us to speak here. My colleague Joaha is also present. And I'd just like to see a show of hands who here is from Bangladesh. You can just leave a comment just to see who we're speaking to. Yeah, so my name is Jennifer Muller-Gallant. I've been working with 2030 Water Resources Group since 2013 in Bangladesh on different projects. And now we're working on the Bangladesh Valuing Water Initiative, which is very timely for the World Water Day. Just to give you a quick overview of who we are, 2030 WRG is a multi-donor trust fund hosted by the World Bank Group. And we work with collective action between government, private sector, and civil society. And on the right, you can see some of the partners in our network. And you can see that companies like Coca-Cola and PepsiCo usually stand in strong competition. But when it comes to water, they actually are very collaborative and working together to address the challenge. Currently, we're working in 14 countries and states across the world. You can see it in the map. And we follow the ACT approach. So in the very first step, whatever we do, we analyze to really understand what we're talking about, what the problems are, and they're very data-driven. In the second step, we convene with the private sector, public sector, and civil society to understand like what are the problems, what are the underlying causes of the problems, and then more importantly, how can we tailor solutions to make to create transformation, which is step 3. Here are a few numbers at glance. We have around 900 partners in our 14 country programs. It's more or less equal balance between the 3 stakeholder groups of private sector, government, and civil society. We have raised around nearly $1 billion for water sector financing and reduced freshwater abstraction, reduced discharge of untreated wastewater, developed new concepts, and had quite some impact in terms of policy change and publications. We work as a stakeholder platform, and in the stakeholder platforms, the participants decide what we're working on, what are the priority areas. And you can see here in Bangladesh, one of the priority areas is the Bangladesh Valuing Water Initiative, which is a thematic committee. And I would like to tell you more about what that is. But before we come to the details of the initiative, I'd just like to share a bit more why we value water, like what is our thinking behind it. So currently, we don't really have the tools or we don't really execute the quantification of the value of water. So we don't have the number of the value of water in our hand. While on the other hand, all the key decision-making for investments, for policies, for business cases, for companies, all rely on quantitative analyses. So by default, the aspect of water just falls over the table or off the table. So once we manage to find some kind of quantification of the value of water, we can use it to select and prioritize projects and investments. We can decide on the allocation of water for competing uses. We can support informed decision-making for policies. For companies, it is much easier to create a business case around water resilient supply chains and production. And it really provides a foundation for sustainable integrated water resources management, and with it, achieving SDG 6 and or the other SDGs, really. So what is valuing water? There are many different definitions around. And just to clarify at the beginning, we define it as considering all benefits provided by water, including the economic, the social, and the ecological dimensions. And just to be very clear, we do not value water to price it. So for us, valuing water and pricing water is very different. We're looking at valuing water in order to improve decision-making and not to then have a final goal of pricing it. So how do we value water? We know in the literature there are very many different approaches and methodologies on how to value water, but we can categorize them in three main categories. One is the revealed preference approach, which observes people's behavior in markets where water is relevant. The most prevalent method is, of course, market prices. However, as we know, markets are not perfect when it comes to water. There's no perfect competition. So the value is not really reflected very well. But we can use proxy prices, such as pumping costs, to understand the approximate value of water. Another way of doing it is looking at a production function and to understand how the difference in the quality and quantity of water in the production function has an impact on the profit of the company. So say if a company had 50% less of water, which would be quite radical, but let's take it, we can see what the impact is on the profit of the company. And the impact on the profit can be taken as a proxy for the value of water for this company. And finally, we can also use a hedonic pricing method, which basically uses a value. So the value of water is reflected indirectly in, for example, property prices. So we can look at the price of a property next to the lake and compare it with the price of a property more inland. And the difference in the value of these two properties can be attributed to people valuing proximity to the lake, the view of the lake, and as such. The next big category are cost-based approaches. The most prevalent one, replacement costs, in which we assess the next best alternative. So say, if we assume, which hopefully will never happen, that Dhaka ran out of groundwater, the next best alternative would be to take surface water and replace groundwater with surface water. So we would look at the costs of installing additional water treatment plants, the piping, and the other infrastructure required to bring the surface water to the people who are using groundwater. And this additional cost would be then the proxy for the value of water. Then we have stated preference approaches, in which we basically ask stakeholders directly for their perceived value of water. The most used approach is the contingent valuation, in which we create a hypothetical scenario in which we can then see how much they want to pay for water. Say, for example, we can create an option to choose between tap water from which you can drink directly, or tap water, which you have to first boil or filter before you use it. And you can see the different prices people would like to pay for each option. And the difference is then the proxy for the value of safe drinking water. So the Bangladesh Valuing Water Initiative came into being, it was inspired by the Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh, who was a member of the UN and World Bank led high-level panel on water. And this high-level panel of water determined or found that valuing water is a priority to achieve sustainable integrated water resources management. And the Prime Minister came back inspired and very eager to implement this valuing water concept into Bangladesh. And now we have the challenge of having quite an abstract academic theoretical concept, and we have to find a way to give it a practical application, a concrete usage to be able to see the benefits it promises. The 2030 WRG offered to support it, and we created a high-level and a technical valuing water committee, which really focuses on integrating the value of water into decision-making to achieve the SDGs. So the high-level committee, the high-level valuing water committee really is very high level. It's being chaired by the principal coordinator, SDG affairs at the Prime Minister's office, who is one of the highest bureaucrats in Bangladesh. And she's being supported by other high-level representatives from the public and private sector and civil society. So decisions are happening very quickly, and they have quick ramifications, which is very nice to work with. And their objective is to really implement the different initiatives and projects to streamline valuing water into decision-making and then to achieve the SDGs. They are being supported by the Technical Valuing Water Committee, which again consists of private sector, civil society, and the governmental representatives. And here really the nitty-gritty things happen. Here we look at what methods do we have, how can we really apply them to Bangladesh, because the Bangladeshi context is of course very different than a developed country context in terms of data and resources. How can we really find an entry point to the bureaucratic processes to integrate the value of water into decision-making and these different questions. So they were very good at really digging deep. So the activities of the Bangladesh Valuing Water Initiative was one, a position paper in which we show all the findings we had over the last few years in terms of methodologies, what can be applied, what are the entry points to change it in the system, like really creating systematic change in a bureaucratic level, applying case studies and pilots and so on. And it's being launched today. So whoever wants to have a copy, you're very welcome to grab one digitally. And this position paper was the basis to a project on developing operational shadow prices for water to support informed policy and investment decision-making processes. And it was exactly what I mentioned before, that this project really had the end goal in mind of how do we really improve decision-making for public investments and private investments, and what is required, going back to forward, what is required to achieve this goal. So we played the whole scenario through with the committees and looking at all the bureaucratic loopholes, all the documents which need to be changed, and so on and so forth. And to make sure that once the project is complete, that we can actually implement it in the whole framework and use it, that in future, all investment decisions are going to be considering the value of water. Yes, and interesting here is that the Ministry of Water Resources wasn't only part of developing the project, but they also decided to finance it. So it's now a turn to be a full government project being executed by the Water Resources Planning Organization, WAPO. And it's quite unusual because typically projects are being financed by development aid agencies or companies. And here the government was very keen to take it on and to support the initiative, showing potential of implementing it in future. At the same time, we're working on a transformative awareness raising campaign on the value of water, which is meant to be really including social media and all the new technology we have now at hand, and integrating the citizens in terms of finding out what are their challenges, what are their solutions, including them in data analyses, using citizen science approaches and such, to have a real move to create more awareness around the value of water. And finally, we're working on creating an interactive knowledge hub in which we want to capture all the information we gathered and found in the process of this project and initiative, so that other countries and researchers are able to easily gain access to it. And if any bachelor student, master student, PhD student is looking for a topic, there's still many topics which need some more information. So we would have a whole array of options. Okay, thank you very much. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Jennifer. It was a very excellent overview of a lot of the valuation methodologies and things coming through there. I'm sure people will have lots of questions for you. So next we would like to invite Dr. Lily Yu, who is the Deputy Division Chief and Senior Engineer from the General Institute of Hydropower and Water Resources Planning and Design, Ministry of Water Resources in China. And you'll be speaking about valuing groundwater, studying on zones classification, management and control methods based upon groundwater functions in China. So take it away. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me well, right?
Yep.
And yeah, thanks. Thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. Today, I will give a brief introduction about our study on groundwater function zoning. I'm going to say three aspects. Firstly, it's about groundwater functions. So by analyzing the role of groundwater plays in the water cycle and the interaction between groundwater and related systems, there are four functions we consider. First, the groundwater is involved in the water cycle, maintains the regeneration and renewal capacity of water resources. We did some calculation. In general, 13% of the precipitation in China becomes groundwaters, and 80% of the groundwater resources are converted into surface water, forming 25% of the surface runoff of the nation. And the second function is maintenance of ecology. Third is for environmental and geology. Well, and the fourth function, of course, it is the resource supply. In China, 18% of the national water supply comes from groundwater, and the proportion in some provinces in the north is more than 50%. So in order to manage groundwater according to different characteristics in each region, we try to identify the dominant function of groundwater at the regional level and classify the groundwater functional zones. The primary functional zones are divided into three categories: protection zone, exploitation zone, and the reserve zone. The protection zones has the ecological and environmental systems that are sensitive to the groundwater table, changes in water quality, and the groundwater exploitation. In the process of groundwater exploitation, the groundwater table should always be maintained above its ecological table. And the protection zone is further divided into three secondary zones. The ecological fragile zone applies where groundwater has great importance for ecological conservation, and the ecological system is very sensitive to groundwater change. Examples include the essential wetlands, natural oases, and their surrounding areas in arid and semi-arid regions, and also important oasis corridors of ecological importance. And the geological and environmental sensitive zone is found where a decrease in groundwater table would result in seawater intrusion, saltwater intrusion, land subsidence, and many other disasters as an effect of groundwater exploitation. The groundwater conservation zone is where groundwater exploitation and human activities are constrained in order to safeguard the surface water system. The zone is mainly located in hilly areas. Vital springs, rivers with important ecological significance, and some riverside areas should also be characterized as groundwater conservation zones. And the exploitation zone. The exploitation zone should satisfy some conditions, including good recharge and storage conditions. Usually, the pumping rate of a single well is no less than 10 cubic meters per hour, and the groundwater quality can meet the requirements of the relevant water users. And there is long-standing demand for groundwater exploitation at present or only in the near future. And the exploitation zone could further split into two secondary zones. The centralized water supply zone is where the water output of a single well is no less than 30 cubic meters per hour. This zone normally consists of centralized water supply for domestic water use and industry production water uses. And the distributed exploitation zone is applied where at present or in the near future, groundwater is mainly exploited by distributed pumping wells for rural life, farmland irrigation, and small rural industry. And a reserve zone can be designated where there is poor water quantity and exploitation conditions, causing difficulty in exploitation for groundwater. Even though there may be a certain potential for utilization for groundwater in some reserve zones, large-scale exploitation will not be scheduled in the near future. And the reserve zone also consists of 3 secondary zones. The unsuitable exploitation zone is where poor water quality and poor groundwater exploitation conditions cannot meet the requirement of water uses. And the water reserve zone has good recharge storage conditions, just that there are few human activities at present or within a certain period of time. In some water reserve zones, the local surface water can meet the water demand, and there is no or only small-scale groundwater exploitation. And the last one is the emergency water supply zone, has relatively good conditions for groundwater reserve, exploitation, and water quality. It is generally forbidden for exploitation, but the water supply is provided only when emergencies or extreme drought occurs. So following the classification method above, each basic unit has been assigned a certain function. So for the primary groundwater functional zones, 67% of the land is protection zone, 18% is exploitation zone, and the remaining 15 is reserve zone. That's for the whole nation. And for the secondary groundwater function zones, a total of 4,886 secondary function zones are recognized across China. In the hilly areas, the groundwater conservation zone accounts for 74%, which is the most widely distributed secondary function zone. In the plain area, the distributed exploitation zone and the non-exploitation zone are the most predominant, taking up 43 and 31 of the plain area, respectively. And these classifications reflect that the plain area is a main area for groundwater exploitation and utilization, and except where there are centralized water supply zones in towns, industries, and mining businesses, distributed exploitation is the main approach for groundwater exploitation. And based on this zoning, we are determining some management criteria for groundwater, including the amount of groundwater people can take from the aquifer, and also the height of the groundwater table should be maintained during exploitation for each region in China. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yu. Yeah, that was quite a sort of a very good overview of all of the different types of groundwater zoning, and I'm sure that our panelists will have some questions about whether those different zones have different values associated with them that we might pick up into the chat. So the next speaker, weirdly enough, is going to be me. Sort of moderating, coming into being a sort of a presenter at the moment. Now, I'm last for a reason. I'm going to talk about slightly different things to many of my colleagues here today. And my presentation is called, I'm just going to get it looking good, hopefully it's there. honoring the relationships with water. So I was taken by one of the comments made by Jennifer in an earlier slide, which was, you can't manage what you cannot measure. Now, what is very strongly coming through in this is there will be a lot of different interpretations about what values mean, what they can be, what is the difference between valuing, methods, etc. I'm actually going to talk about a thing called relational values. Now, it's a relatively recent concept. The International Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services talks a bit about it. And there, where I'm taking some of this material from, for example, this picture. So relational values encompass a wide range of values that are embedded in desirable relationships between people and their environment, or people and other people, that is also sort of moderated by the environment. And these sort of values are quite common amongst a lot of indigenous peoples around the world, of which there are about 500 million people managing around about 38 million square kilometers of land. So it's actually quite an important consideration. So here I will sort of say why they may be important. So for example, there are sort of two ways, I guess, you can look at water governance. You can have a values-based approach where you articulate the sort of values you want to embed into your management, and these can reflect ways of life or inherent beliefs, which is quite strong amongst the sort of these values and managing according to the relationship with place. Or you can have rules-based, where you've got formal institutional arrangements that actually will determine the rules of use before you get there. You can also have this sort of more holistic way of looking, where water is seen as a whole living entity that's actually indivisible, and it's people in nature. The opposite, sort of at the other end of the spectrum, would be dualism, where freshwater systems are often broken into their component parts. You know, we often talk about the surface water, we'll talk about riverbeds, we'll talk about all the different parts of water bodies. And so we often will break up river systems and water bodies into component parts in order to manage those pieces better for maybe efficiency and effectiveness. So the next level down is then thinking about, well, what are those relational values where the human and more than humans are connected through some sort of kinship relationships? I come from New Zealand, and they talk about whakapapa, how you are connected with your environment. And then humans and more than humans have reciprocal obligations and responsibilities. And that's a real feature within sort of more of a place-based, values-based approach, versus instrumental values, which often see freshwater as providing resources for humans. And management will often focus on protecting particular water uses or water resources to support uses of water. A good example of that would be, say, for example, you know, it's very important to provide for irrigation water. Then a lot of the management will be about providing protection to ensure you've got that quality and quantity of water for irrigation, but you may not be thinking about the health of the water body to begin with. So what are some of the examples of these sort of relational values? Well, I mentioned there relatedness, where there is no separation between people and their environment, and that everything in the territory is related or connected. That people and their environments learn from each other and depend upon each other. That's actually quite important. So that goes back to some of that reciprocal agreements and arrangements. And these are values that are held quite strongly in many parts of the world. And that each has a role to play within the overall connected system. And so what this would do is, if you apply this value, you would result in a very different starting point for thinking about how do we have our relationship with water, and therefore what is allowable within that water system, what uses should be there. Another value, which is very common, is that idea of reciprocity, which acknowledges rights and obligations in response to the living more than human entity and other entities within their territories. That these obligations can involve processes that acknowledge and reciprocate for gifts and ensure that the river's needs are met. And in the International Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystems approach, they talk about nature's gifts to people, not just resources to be taken and used, but these are resources that the nature gives to them, and there are reciprocal obligations around that. And that reciprocity can be acted upon in many ways, including acknowledgement of nature's gifts or stewardship. which is essentially suggesting that a healthy water body is first, and then other priority actions are prioritized later once that first need is met. Then the third one is respect. Decisions regarding the environment are made with a conscious respect for the environment and acknowledgement of the role that it plays in the cultural lives of, or as part of kinship ties. For example, many communities are very aquacentric, where the role of the water and the water bodies will determine such things as your direction. It will help determine language. It will help determine the names of places that reflect those relationships between people and their water bodies. And respect as a starting point involves an acknowledgement of the role of land or water body as an individual system as opposed to component parts, and as a living more than human entity that is a part of the same environment. So these are sort of the sort of relationship. So instead of the duology between intrinsic values and instrumental values, these are values that are built about relationships with people and place. Some of it may be instrumental in use. It may be because there has been different materials that have been taken from there, but some of it is simply this relationship between a people and place that has developed over millennia. And of course, this is starting to come into legislation, reflecting that in New Zealand. They talk about the rights of the river in New Zealand, and they recognise some values in that in this particular river case, the river has been given a legal personage. It has the ability to act in the court and have stewards on its behalf. And it actually reflects, some of these values here are more reflective of these relationships, that the river is the source of spiritual and physical sustenance. So recognizing that connection between people and place, that the great river flows from the mountains to sea, that is it's an indivisible and living whole from the mountains to sea, and all of its physical and metaphysical elements. That I am the river and the river is me. In New Zealand, we'll often talk about our connection to our waterways, and the Maori people especially, because that's a key part of the culture, and that there are these connections and responsibilities that come through into recognising for its health and well-being, and that also the small and large streams that flow into one another and form one river. So this is all these sort of other types of values that we need to sort of acknowledge and think about as we look to do this valuing water around the world, because often I sort of typify a lot of the way we look at it as being an allocative approach. We like to measure things. We like to manage for efficiency and effectiveness, but that particular approach is not held by all peoples of the world, and that there are other approaches that may need to be thought about. And so what could this look like? Well, relational values can form a bridge between intrinsic and instrumental values. It acknowledges stewardship rather than ownership, where the health of the water body is the first priority as opposed to the uses thereof. Because you can have situations where we're so strongly managing water for particular purposes that the rivers disappear and the waterways disappear. Don't think that's necessarily the best outcome. That you can use the relations with as a form the basis of the rights of the river approach. That these relational values can actually frame the boundaries of resource use based upon expectations about that nature of relationship. You know, what do we expect of our relationship with our river, and how do we manage to achieve that? And those rights and obligations, not just what we can take, but what do we give back, and how do we ensure that the river is healthy over time? And in essence, in this approach, you would be comparing those instrumental values against expected relationships, as opposed to simply comparing instrumental uses against instrumental values in some sort of optimization exercise. So I think it's important to recognize that there are multiple types of values out there, and there is increased attention, especially in the last 5 years, especially it came through the ecosystem service literature, that recognize that there are these other relationships that haven't always been reflected in the way we look and see water, and need to be included within the valuing water exercise. And that is my little spiel in exactly 10 minutes. Thank you. So if you have further questions, please put them into the chat. And I'll just pass over to Scott to introduce the next section. I drink the water.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for that great presentation, and thank you so much for your help with the moderation thus far. Hey everyone, we are here at the audition time, so that's what would be keen to see some questions coming in. And I know that I've actually seen quite a few already being answered by the panelists, so I appreciate your help and time in doing that as well. So if anyone has questions, please just put them right here in the question box, and we'll get to them. Maybe let's just I'll pick out one here. You know, how maybe sometimes I'll paraphrase this a little bit. You know, would anybody on the panel like to respond to what perspectives do you see that changing in the future? You know, I think as the future we see climate change happening, we see future water shortages, perhaps continued population growth. You know, how do people see the valuations of water, the different ways that you spoke about, and the different contexts changing and informing our ideas about the future? Go ahead and unmute yourself and just feel free to jump in. I don't need to recognize you.
Can I give the answer?
Yes, please do.
Okay, the changing environment. In my presentation, actually, I believe I also have talked about this one. I believe in the future, more and more people will move to the coast area. More and more people will find that the water will have problems. And then the water's value will become higher and higher. And the flood disaster loss will become higher and higher because the uncertainty of climate change, sea level rise, so many things. So all us, especially the members of IWRA, should shift your focus from the mountain area to the coast area, because here more and more people are living. This is my answer. Maybe different people have different understanding.
Yeah, if I may.
Please do.
Yeah, so I think in the future we'll see more and more challenges related to water, and it could be more water in terms of floods, it could be less water in terms of droughts, it could be, what is going to happen for sure is that we need some more support in making decisions. And I think being able to make an informed decision on which investments to undertake, which ones not to undertake, and understanding the impact on water, the consequence of the investment, and looking at what policies do we need is going to be really important. And I think integrating the value of water to support you to make these decisions would be really valuable, and increasingly so when the decisions are becoming more and more complex.
Dr. Yu?
And for groundwater, I think in the future, the amount of groundwater use will not decrease too much, because that is most reliable water sources and it is everywhere. But the over exploitation problem should be treated with obvious effect, because now we are no groundwater more, and we are using groundwater in more reasonable ways and with much efficient techniques.
So David here. So my opinion on this is that the valuing of water is an important way station into the future. It helps to make visible what has often been invisible, that centrality of water across many social, economic, and cultural systems. But I think over time, we've been sort of carrying out quite a lot of optimization exercises in many parts of the world, we'll have to think a little bit more about what are those other values that we're looking to protect into the future, not just the uses, but those whole systems, etc. So my perspective is that the valuing exercise is really important to understand how central water is. But then we'll have to think, well, what do we do with that? And I think that'll be the next step into the future, because we are facing a water crisis in many parts of the world. And that is where we're sort of having huge amounts of exercise spent in doing lots of irrigation systems or energy systems, but we're not necessarily thinking about the needs of the river. And I think some of the different parts of the world are thinking about the river and the healthy river first, and then thinking about what comes thereafter. And I think that's an important consideration. Thank you.
Kind of moving on, there's another question I want to get to, but I think maybe we can just kind of springboard from this. One person is asking, Youssef Ocean is asking their focus is on PhD research, but I guess kind of we can look at this more broadly and see at, both in terms of PhD research, but also for academic research or policy research at the governmental level, at the NGO level. What are the areas that require the most urgent focus to really build on? Where should people be looking in the next, immediately, urgently? What areas do we all see here? Again, feel free to just unmute yourself and speak.
Yes, for me, I would think the most important area I see is the impact on our water quality. I think we know a lot about water quantity, but I think water quality is really very much unknown. And the parameters we're measuring are just so basic, BOD, COD, solids and everything. It's very, very basic. And other things which we are discharging into the water from the industry, the factories, the pharmaceutical industries, the minings, we have got no idea how much is in our water, how it's being removed by the current treatment, probably not very much, and what the impact is on our bodies and on the whole ecosystem. So I think we've got like a huge white elephant in the room, or pink elephant, however you call it, which color the elephant has, big elephant, which really needs to be looked at, and then actions need to be taken. I think for me, that would be the most important topic in the next 10 to 15 years.
Anyone else see some areas of research? What, Dr. Yang?
All right. I think for UN's target agenda 2030, we only have 20 years to go. We have to cash our promise to supply water to everybody. That's our UN's, every government's, I think it is very urgent for every government, to every researchers, and to change your mind. The water is not running out of water. Water is running out of our river mouths. This one is very important from our highest level to government level, state government level, research level, and everybody. We have to tell. We have to develop the flood water. Without the flood water development, all of your promise will be empty. Just a barber promise. That's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the other possible areas of exploration, going back to the fact that sort of approximately 25% of the land area, including some of the highest areas of biodiversity, and many water towers, many important headwater catchments are located in lands with Indigenous peoples, and there can be quite different perspectives. And so there's a need to improve multi-pluralistic governance, sort of recognizing that there's not just Western science, there are other, Indigenous knowledge, and it's not just understanding, different methods of Indigenous knowledge, but also understanding the context within which that Indigenous knowledge comes forth. And I think there'll be a need to do that because, when we think about where a lot of our water comes from in many parts of the world, it starts in those headwaters. And you need to think about those pluralistic cultures and worldviews as you sort of look into the future. And it's certainly happening in several countries around the world, the sort of plurality in water governance and understanding those different worldviews and how they mesh.
Thank you. It was good. Dr. Yu, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think all these areas just mentioned are very important, and I don't think there's priorities, but there are some areas need some, and also the results need is urgent to be implemented. Like for groundwater management, we all know this groundwater is using everywhere, but we really don't know the exact amount how much we have used for groundwater, because sometimes it's really impossible or very inefficient to install the metering equipment for each well. So if there are any ways that we can calculate, we can determine the demand with some data which is easy to meter. Maybe that is something we can do about research and to implement.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on to another question here, changing gears a little bit. Miss Nicole asks, says, on Reunion Island, we have to apply national French laws which are not adapted to secure water access for all communities. Have you seen the same problem in your research? And what are the keys to translate local water management rules into national change in water management and constitutional rules? So I think this is really a question about asking about the interaction between different scales of law, constitutional law, regional or water management, and then local on the ground law. And in particular, I think when pointing out, look at the context of Reunion Island, which is pretty far away from mainland France. So the laws that might be adapted for around the mainland of the metropole of a country may not be well adapted to some of the further away areas. So looking for that kind of flexibility in law, I think, as well. So can people speak to maybe perhaps the rule of the application of law in their context?
I can't speak to constitutional law, but certainly in New Zealand, so I come from New Zealand, and different countries around the world will have different approaches. It's a simple answer when you come to water resources. For example, in New Zealand, we don't have a water ministry, but all of the powers around water laws and restrictions and the way that water use is planned is actually done at a regional or sub-regional level. And so whilst the national policies might have some direction in them, it's usually up to those local communities to be able to decide what that and interpret what that means for them. Now, when it comes to constitutional aspects, that can be a lot more difficult to address. And I sort of can't really give you any suggestions on that, but increasingly around the world, there are these new, I guess, coalitions that are pushing for more understanding of their local water bodies and recognizing that they've got their individual characteristics and not just thinking about a national perspective versus a local perspective. Because what may be apparent, and I do a lot of work in climate change planning as well, that at a national level, you may have a water deficit or you may have an abundance of water. But at those local regional levels, it's actually sub-regional level, sub-national level, it's much more difficult to plan around that. And you can often find everywhere that there's that real difference between those national priorities and those local priorities. And it really is hard to address that. But I think there's a case of trying to reinterpret those in terms of your local context and building the case for why this is different here. That's the only answer I can give there.
I thought it was quite good. Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak about law, regulation, and the relation, how it worked in their contexts? Going once, going twice. Okay. I think this is an interesting, maybe sort of a question coming from Mr. Zhu. As says, saving water is the most important response to our water resources, but there are a few avenues to boost people's awareness of saving water, and they hope that there are more and more useful experiments and experiences for introducing people to the importance of saving water. But maybe we can ask here about how people have seen the values that they discussed in your presentations and in your context and case studies used as ways to sort of educate and raise awareness around the idea of not just saving water in the pure quantity sense, but protecting water, extending our understanding to better managing our water resources. Can anyone maybe speak to that?
I can give it a go.
Hey, well,
yeah. So I think, I mean, for one, I don't believe that we have the same objective all over the world to save water. I think we only have to save water in areas where we do face water stress and now in the future. But in places where it's water abundant, there might be a different issue, which might be, water pollution or floods or a different water risk. But I agree to you, saving water overall. So we use value of water to be able to understand like what decisions are going to lead to saving water. For example, if we look at two different areas, area A and area B, and we want to develop it, let's say with rice paddies, we can see that if we use the value of water in a very water stressed context, the value of water is very high. So it might be more beneficial for the country to use this high value of water for a different purpose, like industry or higher value crops. Whereas in an area where the water is very abundant, the value of water might be much lower, where you can actually, have this rice paddy project. So, we're using this comparison, using the value of water would lead to you finding the solution that you would actually be growing your rice in this area, which is water abundant, versus the other one. So it gives you a very good quantitative assessment tool. And the same in terms of wetlands. Should we build should we expand the city on a wetland upstream of a city? Yes or no? And you can use the value of water to really quantify whether this is a good idea or not. I mean, logically, we know how it is, but for decision makers, often they just need to have the numbers and they do a cost-benefit analysis and it becomes positive because they don't consider the impact on water. And then if they include the value of water in the CBA, they will actually find that it might become a negative benefit if they include it. So I think using the value of water and quantifying it in some way can really help to improve the decision making in the long run and thus saving water.
Okay. Anyone else want to? Thank you for that. That was a good response. It was very informative. Would anyone else like to speak and give us some views there? No, it's fine. All right. Here's something from an anonymous viewer. So their name will remain anonymous. It says, generally, we should focus improvements on infrastructural, promoting groundwater recharge, or perhaps storing through dams, but the infrastructure. But then, as in the Philippines, experienced rain, or as you can see in any context, severe disasters. Then it caused overflowing of the dams and then discharged into communities downstream. So I think the question here is, how can we look at questions around resilience and building in our understanding of protecting communities to what we're doing to improve infrastructure around water. So how can we sort of sensitize our planning to the value of protecting communities as well from the perhaps negative consequences of what we're doing? Thoughts? Yes, go ahead and speak, Dr. Yang.
Okay, I'm happy to talk this one because IWRA Coastal Reservoir Association also pay high attention to countries like Indonesia and the earthquake areas, Philippines, and even Taiwan, China, because this is very dangerous for you to store the water in the dam. Even you have the dam because earthquake, because the rainfall intensity and the rainfall, annual rainfall is very, very high in this range. Some years 3 meters per year, even higher. And that is you have floods and you have the disasters. If you build the dam above your head, and then in case of earthquake and dam break, will kill so many people. This is we have to avoid the disasters. That is one. So we have to solve your problem. Does not mean we have to build, we have to have another problem. This is the no solution. So I highly recommend those countries in the earthquake active areas. You have to consider cost reservoir for your water solution. You have to use cost reservoir to learn from Singapore, and then to mitigate your flood disaster, and then have the zero disasters for your earthquake, dam break. And also this will be, look at my background. This is a barrier for your tsunami, in case of tsunami. This is what I want to say. Thank you.
Would anyone else like to?
Yeah, so it's David here. I think the simple answer is there is no one silver bullet. I think over time, given the impact of climate change, given the impact of increased uses of water, increased urbanization, there's not going to be an either or approach. There's going to need to be some investment in a whole lot of methods, some soft, some hard, but also investing in redundancy. That there is going to be potentially an overcapacity in some aspects of your overall system, because there will be times where it spills only overtops those dams. At times, sometimes you're going to have to ensure that there is time for the groundwater to recharge, depending on what's in the upper catchment. So the simple answer is we're going to have to invest in a multitude of things, and we're going to have to build in some redundancy, especially around climate change impacts into the system. So no simple answer, I'm afraid.
It's unfortunate. That'd be great if it's simple answers. Did anyone else have some response to this, or would we move on to the next question? All right, I think this next question, I'm gonna go back, Dr. Mulder-Goland. You already responded there, but I like what anonymous viewer here is bringing up this question of, they ask, in a place of high scarcity, how to value the use of treated wastewater while there is a social cultural beliefs that refuse it. But I think this is really, to me, a question about, sort of how do we resolve questions of true conflict in values? How do we overcome these sort of, these conflicts where one group values and one group does not? I mean, what do we look for resolving those kind of situations?
Yeah, well, I would say I would first understand, like, why is this being there's an echo somewhere. So what are the concerns for the people who are refusing using treated wastewater? And are these concerns valid or not? I mean, they might be very valid. If you're in a country which doesn't have very good regulation and very good technology and oversight, I would definitely refuse using treated wastewater too. So understanding and really getting into the details of what is them from, and then just seeing if these concerns aren't valid, you can then have an information communications campaign targeted at these people to kind of change their to take away their concerns, to make them feel it's okay, and to make them understand why it might be required in a certain context.
Can I jump in a little bit on this one as well? So the question didn't actually say what they were talking about, whether it was for drinking water use or whether it was to just do with general and treated wastewater. In New Zealand, one of the things that happens is trying to understand why people may not want to do this due to their socio-cultural belief. And for example, in New Zealand, you're not supposed to mix waters from different basins. And so treated wastewater is deemed to have lost some of its life force, but it can be brought back if it comes through the land rather than going through to being mixed with another water. that if the land is part of the process of, I guess, restoration and rehabilitation of the water. And so what we will do is from that treated wastewater, it'll go through a specific wetland to give it some of its life force back before it goes to the next users. So in this particular case, trying to understand what were the reasons for it, and then seeing if there was some ability to address those concerns. And so in New Zealand, you know, a wastewater treatment plant that I've been involved with, we've invested in wetlands, even though the wastewater is being treated to a very high level, because it helps to understand and identify and resolve those cultural concerns about that life force element of the water. And so then we put it through a wetland, and the land has now been part of the restoration and rehabilitation. So now it's okay to use again. And so that's one of those other ways of looking at it. And so to understand those, to try and understand those worldviews a little bit is important.
Absolutely. Would Dr. Yu or Dr. Yang? Dr. Yu, if you'd like to speak, yes.
Unmute.
Just unmute yourself there.
Nini, unmute. Yeah.
Hi, I am just reading the other question. Sorry, it's about the value groundwater in the arid zone. And maybe can I say something a little bit?
Yes, of course.
Well, yeah. So for the value groundwater in the arid zones, firstly, we need to know the dominant functions of the groundwater in the arid zones, because we know in arid zones, the groundwater may be the very crucial factor for supporting the ecosystems. And then we need to know what kind of ecosystem are based on, are relying on groundwater, and we need to determine how much groundwater uses for this kind of ecosystem, and to determine how much groundwater people can take from the aquifer, and also the reasonable groundwater table we should maintain. And then when we do the exploitation, we need to follow the criteria. Okay.
Great. Thanks. Dr. Yang, would you like to?
Just people that talking about the wastewater, people's attitude, and then to add this one, I experienced this two cities. One is the Brisbane in Australia, another one is Bangalore in India. The government invests a huge amount of money to purify the wastewater, toilet water, and then to the high standard level to prepare for drinking. But these two cities failed, and people don't want to use it. And Singapore also used this one for drinking, and but most of the water they call it as a new water, and then this water is used for industrial. So currently, people is very hard to accept that they treated wastewater for drinking purpose. Definitely, if we say the water for agriculture, for wetland, for other purpose, no any problem. I can say we should do this one, and we should continue this one. But for drinking, we should be careful. And I also don't think our people should drink the wastewater. And then because, as I said, we have sufficient water. Don't make mistake. We have sufficient water. We don't. The water is not running out of water. This is our message.
And also about the treated water, I want to say, actually treated water is used a lot in the North China, like for Beijing, Tianjin. We use this a lot treated water for wetlands, for the cities cleaning, and for agriculture. But yes, it is. We are not using that for drinking water, but that is a very important water supply for the environment.
All right. Well, we are here at 10:30 my time, so it's been about 90 minutes, and I think it's about time for us to wrap up the webinar. I know we have a couple questions left, and we could probably, if we keep working on it, we could probably speak all day. But I know our panelists have other things to do today, and I'm sure the audience does as well. So I will suggest anyone who has outstanding questions, if you would, to pose those to our panelists directly. You can find them online. I'll remind everyone that we're going to have a copy of the presentations, the PDFs, as well as this recording of the webinar up on our website, www.iwra.org, within a few days. So give us a few days and we'll have that up there. But if you have to tune in again or share this with colleagues, please feel free. We'll have that ready for you. I would again like to thank my panel, everyone. A big thank you to Xingqing Yang, Executive Secretary of International Association for Coastal Reservoir Research in Australia, David Herbert Coleman, Program Manager, Water Resources CIWI, and excellent moderator for us, Jennifer Moeller-Guller, Water Risk Expert at the World Bank, Francesco Ballio, a Professor of Hydraulics at Pontino di Miano in Italy, and Dr. Lily Yu, Deputy Division Chief and Professor Level Senior Engineer, General Institute for Hydropower and Water Resources Planning and Design, Ministry of Water Resources in China, and a great member of our IWRA China chapter. So some of the panel and IWRA are on Twitter. So if you're interested, go ahead and look them up and give us a follow. I know that if some of these presentations left you interested in learning more, you can also go to our LinkedIn webpage to continue discussion there and look for more IWRA updates. So I hope that everybody found these insights provided by the panel during the special event to be really helpful. They gave me a lot of material to think about in my coming days, and I hope it's building some creativity for you as well. So just to remind everybody, the webinar was brought to you today by the International Water Resources Association, a 50-year-old nonprofit, non-governmental educational organization. We focus on bridging disciplines and geographies and connecting professionals, students, individuals, corporations, and institutions who are concerned with the sustainable use of the world's water resources. So if you're interested in learning more about the association or becoming a member, please go to www.iwra.org. So on behalf of the whole IWRA office, thank you for viewing the webinar and have a great World Water Day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.